Shalom from Israel, I'm Ariel Ben Avram. This week we read Parasha Vayeira, which literally means in Hebrew, and he appeared. Also could be translated, and he saw. But usually they translate it, generally say, and he appeared to Abraham, referring to God. The context of this appearance is a matter of discussion among our sages, but mainly the general reason that our sages converge in pointing out is that God came to visit Abraham in the third day after his circumcision, Brit Milah. The tradition says that the third day is the most painful day after the procedure, so God decided to visit him. So he appeared to him. We have mentioned in several commentaries in our blog, God's Love, that the verb to see in Hebrew, as we said before, it also means to appear. So it's like what we see is what is appeared. So it's like it's the action, but at the same time the effect of the action. So in other words, we see because we appeared. Something like that. Now, it's interesting because this appearing is mentioned in relation to the offerings that three times a year Israel, the people of Israel, used to bring to the temple. So they will call it Re'im. It's like they were going to see God. So appearing to God with the offerings was an opportunity to see him. So it's like a very dynamic effect of the verb to see and to appear. Likewise, our sages remark that the verb to see implies knowing, and the verb to hear implies understanding. So in the Hasidic tradition, there's a debate. What is more important? Which one is more important? To see or to hear? Of course, the obvious answer would be to see. So in other words, when we see something, we know what it is because we're seeing it. So one thing is when people tell us we hear about something. And another complete different thing is when we see that something. So, interestingly, they say also, some of them actually, this is very, very important, that actually hearing is more important than seeing. Why? When we hear about something, we are forced to understand what is that we have been told about. So it's like people say a house, we haven't seen a house. So people tell us about a house. What is a house? The walls, the roof, the rooms. So then we start trying to picture, yes, visually, but at the same time, we are forced to understand what is the function of this thing that we cannot see. What is the meaning of it? It's like we start to assimilate the concept, the conception of what we have been told instead of seeing it. So why they say that it's more important hearing than seeing? Because when you see something, you may not understand what that is if you are not previously told about what it is. So, if we haven't seen a house and we see a house, without being told that this is a house, we may have the idea that it may not be a house. It's a structure that we see standing on a plain or a hill. So we really don't know what that is. We don't have previous references to understand what are we seeing. So we have to be careful about that. So the lesson here is that when we see something, we are compelled, we must actually, we must understand what we see. We have to pay attention about what we see. In other words, what we see is not necessarily what we understand. It's like coming to a movie. This is the typical example. We come to a movie, to the theater, like 15 minutes late, 10 minutes late. We saw something. We saw like a scene, particular scene in the movie. There's people there, there's a street, there are cars, people moving around. We can see that. We can identify the scene clearly. It's in a street, there's people are walking from one side to the other. But that's it. But we don't understand the context of what's going on in that particular picture, that particular image. We don't know. Why? Because we didn't know what was happening before. So we don't have a reference to understand the image. So the idea, the lesson here about paying attention to listening or hearing, meaning understanding, is more important than seeing and knowing, because they relate the verb to see with to know. The moment you see, you know what you're seeing, but you are not necessarily understanding what that is. So understanding, it's a previous condition for knowing. It's very essential to understand. So when we say the most fundamental statement in Judaism, which says, listen, hear Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord our God is one. So hear Israel. So it's interesting why it could have been said, know Israel, be aware Israel. The Lord is our God, the Lord is one and only one. Because we have to understand what that means. It's like this is beyond seeing the oneness of God. We have to assimilate what the oneness of God is. And by assimilation, we're talking about understanding. It's like we may see, but we may not get the oneness Hashem had. So we have to understand, we have to hear in order to know, in order to see, and then in order to know. Now, this is a very important preamble to speak about this portion. There are several events, this visit, the annunciation, so to speak, of the future childbirth of Sarah. She's going to deliver a baby called Yitzhak. Then there's a third message which is related to the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. And after that, there are many events happening here. And Sarah is abducted by Abimelech, the issues going on. But the most important, the one that we are going to focus here, in this comment. And after we have said the preamble that we have said, all this thing about the unity, the oneness, is the Akedah. The Akedah is the binding. This is the Hebrew meaning of the word, the binding of Yitzhak, Isaac. This is the most important thing that happened in this portion. I mean, there are other, of course, everything is important, but in this case, it's relevant to us to be aware of, to understand. So we're going to focus on that. Isaac was 37 years old when God told Abraham, I want you to sacrifice your son for me. Now, there's a debate. It's a lot of debates, actually, why God is doing this. What's the point? Abraham is faithful to God, his wife, his son, the very observant, devoted Jews, Hebrews. Abraham has passed 9 previous tests, natural tests, in which he proved his loyalty, his faithfulness in God. So it's like it was unquestionable. So then the question is, why this is happening? Why this is necessary to happen? What is behind this? So we mentioned a while ago the oneness, the utmost, the foremost, the most important statement in Judaism. It's about the oneness of God. We have to understand that we're part of it. This is essential. So, Abraham and his family knew about this. They know about the oneness of God. All the issues that Abraham had lived before he came to Canaan from his homeland was because of the oneness of God. In his homeland, people were idolaters, including his family, his father. So he said, I'm not an idolater, I believe in one God, one and only God, from whom everything comes, emanates. So the tradition, the oral tradition, the Midrash says that Abraham knew this when he was 3 years old. It's like he came to the conclusion that there was a bigger God on top of nature, on top of the wind, on top of the rain, on top of the earth, on top of the stars. Just like if there's a moon and a sun, then somebody have to be behind them. Somebody have to be created them. But what about the stars and the galaxies? There's somebody who had created all these things. They're not gods by themselves. There's somebody behind all creation. So he came to this conclusion when he was 3 years old. Well, we shouldn't think that he was basically a toddler. No, we're talking about that in our oral traditions say that at that time, by 3 years old, they had the physical body and the maturity of a 20-year-old person. So he was mature enough at 3 in order to realize what is God for us according to the Torah, according to what he wants us to know. So, under that understanding, he is willing to perform the sacrifice, the offering. It's like, yes. So, we're going to read something that is very important here. So, when they came to the place for the sacrifice, he said, and Abraham took the wood for the offering and placed it on Isaac, his son. He took in his hand the fire and the knife, and the two of them went together. So you say, what's the point of saying together? If they were together, they went, the two of them went. What is the point of saying together? So Rashi and other commentators say because they have the same thinking, the same conception. They both knew what they were doing. So it's like the father was not thinking about something and the son was thinking about something. No, that didn't happen. So, of course, that episode that makes us ask things like the moment when Isaac spoke to Abraham, his father, and said, "Father," and he said, "Here I am, my son." And he said, "There are the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the offering?" It's like people immediately think Isaac didn't know what's going on. Therefore, what he was asking about, where's the animal for the sacrifice? So it's interesting, the answer. We have to pay attention to the answer, because everything in the Torah has the meaning that we expect in order to understand what is the message that God wants to convey to us. And Abraham said, God will seek out for himself the lamb for the offering, my son. And again they say, and the two of them went together. So it's repeated twice to emphasize. Now, God will seek out for himself. It's like interesting, God's want a sacrifice. Abraham says God is going to look for himself the offering, the lamb for the sacrifice. Now, we have to understand that when Abraham is saying this, and this is obviously, we're talking about the Hasidic mystic tradition, we're not talking about most of the traditional interpretations and meanings and teachings that we daily study in Judaism. This is a little beyond of that. So God will seek out for himself. In other words, God is God, meaning that everything comes from him. So the lesson that we have to learn from these two gentlemen, Abraham and Isaac, is that everything comes from God, everything belongs to a unity. We belong to that unity. So we have no business, actually. This is very important. And we have to understand it in the right way. We don't want to get misinterpretation and misconceptions about what we say here. The issue here is that's the fact. If we believe in God, obviously, and believe in God in the context of Judaism, it's like we really have nothing here to do except God's will, because we are his creatures. So in the same way that the animals are pre-programmed to act instinctively in a particular way, we are programmed to act with free will and in a different set of circumstances because we're human. But that doesn't necessarily exempt us for being outside of God's will. All the way around, we're the most responsible, the most accountable for. Because we have free will, we have privileges that animals don't have. Now in the revolution of animal rights and that kind of thing, what about us? What rights do we have as humans in this creation, in this material world? What is us? What is that determines who we are, what we have and what we do? And of course we have to make an inventory. We have to know. But anyway, that's another issue that we will talk about. Actually, we have referred about this issue before, the Jewish identity, which actually had to do with this. This is about Abraham and Isaac represents the real, true Jews, Hebrews. I'm not saying that we are not. What we're saying is that the prototype of what we're supposed to emulate, be, manifest, is exactly what these people are doing here. So it's like, yeah, you give us life, you are a God, we recognize you're the one and only. Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. God is our God, God is one. Then we have to act accordingly to that. So it's like God is telling us, okay, you and us, actually us, Abraham, Isaac, and God are in the same. place. We are. The thing is that we have to be aware of that. So ego's fantasies and illusions, the fantasies and illusions that we create out of a feeling or a belief of lack is what makes us feel separate. Our sense of individuality. It's like in this, I'm here and you're there. It's a separation. We're not talking about like by being individuals, we have to be individualistic. It's two different things. So in this, we have an individual things that we have to work on, but at the same time, we have an obligation with the collective consciousness, with the collective society, the society as a whole. We're part of it. We're not outside of that. So that we have to harmonize from our own harmonizing process, like harmonizing all levels of consciousness, intellect, common sense, thought, discernment, mind, feelings, emotions, passions, and instincts. Once we organize that on the rule of love, then we're going to be able to share that in the collective. But first we have to do that ourselves. So these two gentlemen, father and son, Abraham and Isaac, they had that harmonized process very clear from a long, long time before, including Abraham's wife, Isaac's mother, Sarah. They really knew what they were doing. They really knew the God very well. So it's like, okay, God has a plan. This is part of a plan. This is not a test as many. Yeah, it is a test, but we have to go beyond that. We shouldn't trivialize our relationship or conception of God. There are reasons. So it's like, we're together on this, sacrificing the life of one of you, your son, for instance, in this case, says God, is part of a plan that I have. We don't know God's plans. They sound like a whim, like, why would we like to do that? So we don't know. Really, we don't. But there's a plan behind it. And the plan is good because he's telling Abraham, bring your son, I will multiply your descendancy, your descendants. So it's like, if I believe in God, what God is telling me, he's going to multiply my offspring, why he's doing this. It's like my offspring is going to come from this guy who wants me to kill him. So it's like, what is the whole purpose of this? But then there's a bigger purpose that we don't know. There's something that we have to surrender to God, which is everything. Everything we love the most. Our children, one and only child that Abraham had at 100 years old, when he was 100 years old. It's like, it's really precious. Especially if there's a covenant behind him. It's like, we have to go do God's will. We have to do that. We have no choice. So we have to put aside all ego's fantasies and illusions, including our feelings, the almost positive feelings that we may have for what we love the most, our attachments, our addictions, our obsessions, for what God's wants. So it's like we have to be really in God's plan in order to be real part of it. But we don't know until he tells us. So it's like, I want you here, bring your son. We're going to be together, the three of us. I said, okay, we go. They came, they went together, as we read it twice. And then the offering was offered. It's like, this is your creature, your creation. We are your creation. You do whatever you please. Yes. So we have to be unattached. The lesson here of the Kedah, of the offering of Isaac, is to really detach ourselves for anything materialistic that we can ever feel, including feelings and emotions. Good feelings and emotions like having family, having children, and surrounded to God. That's what it is. It's not like sacrificing. It's like offering. We have to understand the sacrifices in Judaism, the offerings, as something that we elevate to God. So it's not necessarily an experiment that we're gonna bring some wheat and barley and then we're gonna burn it and end of the story. No, all these things represent something that we have to be aware of. So it's the fruit of the land. What is the land? We have said that the land is life, the goodness of life. That's what we're going to elevate symbolically to God. That's exactly what the offerings mean. And from this first offering is are inspired the other offerings. So everything that from here, we're going to offer to God animals, lambs, goats, ox, or bulls, is in representation of what we want to elevate to Him. It's like, yes, we have an eagle, we have a bull. Yeah, we have some kind of determination, stubbornness to do things. Yeah, a goat. Yeah, we have a sense of obedience about what is good for us to pursue. So we obey because it's good for us. It's a sheep, a lamb. Then we elevate that to Him, to God. Now, who's God in this case? His will. What is His will? The goodness that He wants to give us back. It's like, when you recognize, He's telling us, actually, He will say that in future portions of the Torah, especially in the book of Leviticus, Vayeira, when He explains the offerings that we have to bring to the temple. So the whole idea is like, we belong to God. We're going to elevate what is the resources, our mind, our possessions, what we are and what we have, because it belongs to Him. Everything belongs to Him. So we have to take out of our minds and feelings and conceptions that what we have and what we are is something that we have built ourselves. So I'm a medical doctor. I went to university, went to college, I trained myself to be a doctor. I am. I provide that for myself. I studied it every night, more than 8 hours every day, in order to be who I am. Now, therefore, it's thanks to me that I am who I am now. Yeah, could be. Could be, actually, no, it is that way. But the whole idea is that all the brains that I have, all the interest that I have in order to be a physician, comes from something that is not me. It's part of my nature with which I was born. So what is that nature? What is that impulse to make me pursue a career in medicine? And some people can call it ego, some people can call it determination, persistence, whatever. But ultimately, what is this thing, this force that is driving us to move on? Besides just the idea of being ego, of being something that is going to please us in our emotions, in our feelings, in our senses. It's something bigger than that. You can call it soul, you can call it intellect, you can call it like actually life force. What makes us move, what makes us think, what makes us be. That belongs to God. So it's actually, the issue here is to separate ourselves from the conceptions that we have about who we are and what we have. Consumer society, glamour, appearances, whatever. I mean, the image that we want to portray and to protect, prejudice, whatever, shame, reputation, and see what is left. In other words, what is really meaningful in this? What is the point of all this? And then we act accordingly. So studying Torah is basically knowing who we are as Jews, as Hebrews. What is our identity? So we have to read these people's life and try to see, this is who I am, this is what I'm supposed to be. Then I have to understand my own offering, our own offering. What is that we're going to offer to God? Our fantasies, ego's fantasies and illusions, our desires, our whims, or what really transcends in life. What is what we know that transcends life? Love. Then we realize that we're an emanation of God's love. We're here and we're sustained because He provides us with sustenance. And he's telling us at the same time, take care of what I'm giving you and share with each other so you all be happy. That's the whole idea. That's what the Torah says. Just be good people for yourself and for the rest of the world. And then we act because of goodness, because of love's ways and attributes, which are the material manifestation of God's love. Then we see that when we elevate ourselves, then we become perfect. And we say later, it's the perfect offering. Isaac became the perfect offering. It's like it's completely devoted to God. It's like, I do whatever you say I should do. I must do. I have to do. So that's the idea. So we know that what is that? We read the Torah. We learn the commandments. We learn the rabbinical laws. You learn the ethical implications of all these laws in order to be good people. To be goodness, the goodness that we claim we came from. It's like, okay, we are children of God. Yes, we are. God is good, and therefore what we are, we have to act accordingly. So it's like our identity, our essence and true identity is the goodness of love, of God, God's love. Then we must act accordingly. So the people who act in a different way than that, they could say that, are you children of God? Are you a child of God? Maybe not. So anyway, that's the whole idea of the Akedah. So once when this happened, it's interesting because our Midrash tried to explain why after the sacrifice, the immediate, the next portion of the Torah is Sarah's burial, death. So Abraham came to bury his wife. So they don't mention Isaac anywhere. It's like, well, what's this guy? What happened to him? So our oral tradition explains that after the sacrifice, God said, you are with me, you and I are one. Like Abraham, you and the Jewish people, the Shema Israel, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Ehad, this fundamental principle was patented, was real, was tangible in the Akedah. It's like we are together, we're one. So he said that he spent 3 years with God in the Garden of Eden. So during that time, he was basically preparing himself to be a husband and a father. And that's exactly what he did. So this is interesting because the Zohar, there's some midrash from the Zohar, the Kabbalah tradition, that they say that indeed the sacrifice happened. So it's like Abraham sacrificed his son, and then his son's soul, body, went to the Garden of Eden, and then God made him come back. It's like after 3 years, okay, now you can go back to the material world exactly the way you came. But we believe the other one. We don't believe in the Zohar oral tradition. We follow the other one. God stayed with him wherever it was, either in the Garden of Eden or somewhere else. And when the time was proper, Isaac returned. But the point is, it's not about the story, what happened, if he killed him, if the father sacrificed it or he didn't. The whole point is to understand what is behind the offering. What is behind when we bring something to God? We have to understand that. But this is the base, this is the foundation of, as we said before, of the future sacrifices in the temple. By the way, this sacrifice, this offering, took place exactly, our Torah oral tradition tells us, that it happened in the same place where the future Temple of Jerusalem was going to be built. So there, the offerings are going to be brought. Now, we have said before that the idea of the offerings is to not just to elevate ourselves, but in that elevation, in that bringing up the best of us to God, in order to be, and in order to do, and in order to have, the whole idea behind it is to do exactly what God wants us to do. That's the idea behind. So it's like, we bring you, this belongs to you, we belong to you, just tell us what is next. And then what is next is really our own individual and collective redemption. That's why we bring sacrifices. To pursue what we really are in terms of doing. So in other words, it's like the generalized belief is that we bring the offering because of a sin, because of thanksgiving, because of guilt, and that's it. It's like, okay, I brought the sacrifice, now I'm forgiven, I'm fine, next. In some way, yes, we have to clear ourselves with what is holding us down to be what we really are. But the whole idea is to make a connection with God. It's interesting because the name of the sacrifice is called korban. The semantic root of korban is koreb, which means to be close. So in other words, when we bring a korban to God, a sacrifice, we're basically being close to Him. So in that closeness is the one that we have to emphasize here. And we have to find out what this closeness is about. What is this Ma Israel, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad is about? That fundamental statement of Judaism is to be one with God. The oneness that we were talking about earlier. But then we have to realize to what oneness we belong. What is the whole point about being one with God? What is the point of this permanent awareness, permanent connection with God? What is the purpose? Is there a plan? Yes, there is. Then we have to wait and see. So once we elevate all our levels of consciousness, everything up to God, then we will know what to do. So in other words, in practical terms, the idea is how we assimilate this now. It's not to just talk about theories or anything like that. Once we elevate everything close to God, meaning to the goodness of God, to God's love, to the essence of who we are, we came from Him, then we realize that love, His love, His goodness, is the one that has to lead our lives. So we have to allow that every aspect of consciousness that we mentioned before has to be led, guided, conducted by love's ways and attributes. That's the whole point. The goodness for the goodness. So this is not a ritualistic thing that we're going to do this, I'm going to put the turban, that I'm going to wear this kind of clothes in order to perform this kind of thing. No, it's not about that actually. It's about being connected with our Creator. This is the most important thing that we can ever conceive as humans who believe in a Creator. To know the Creator. It's the whole point. We have said that before, we're going to be keeping saying it. That's the whole purpose of us here. We're creatures of God. He has a plan, therefore we have to know what He wants. We know that through the Torah, we study the Torah, and then we act accordingly. So we became good people because we became from goodness, as we said before. So this is basically the message that we wanted to convey this week. In the future, of course, we will refer to particular aspects of this portion, but the most important is this one. So let's be aware that we are the offering. Why? Because we're the blessing. The blessing in terms of the life. I mean, we're alive. We have a life thanks to Him. Life is the blessing. So life is what we have to elevate to Him. So this is actually a life that is going to be sacrificed. Now, don't forget that in Latin, the term sacrifice means do the sacred. Sacred is sacred. Fare is to do. Fare. So it's like by being or doing or making a sacrifice, we're doing what is sacred. So that's the idea. Then what is sacred? God. What is sacred? Us, life. Then we're bringing life to a level of sacredness. What is sacred? Love. This is the most sacred thing. Without the Lord, we can't live. We can't. 1 second, since we're born. And we have to pay attention to that, listen to that, seeing that, understanding that, assimilating that. And be, as we have said before, we have to be empiricists. Trial and error, false and truth, positive, negative, useful, useless, destructive, constructive, etc. And act accordingly. That's the whole point. So when we make our own sacrifice, when we become our own Isaacs in our consciousness, we become the perfect offering. We have to be aware that in that attitude, in that offering, we realize that God and us is one. And we don't have to care about it. We're going to live it, we're going to die. We just do what He wants us to do. It's good enough. It's God. God is enough. So we don't have to question anything. So in other words, we cannot perceive and conceive God based on our own egos, fantasies, and illusions. We're going to build God in a particular way. That's what most people do, including us. We still have this pagan idea that we can control God. And we want Him to do things the way we want them, not the way He wants them. So it's like, it's our own little gods inside, our own little God, our egos, fighting, trying to fight with God. It's like we're nothing. This one God, one and only. We're just His emanation. We come from Him. So what's the point here? It's another way to understand ego here. Understand that our imagination, when we imagine the things that we think we lack, what we feel we lack, versus what fills everything, what fulfills everything. So what is that? Love. Then we leave behind, we leave aside ego's fantasies and illusions, and then we embrace God's love's ways and attributes. And then we realize that when we are in love, living in, for, towards, by love, we don't like anything. We don't. We have everything, and that everything is God. God is enough. Okay? So, it was nice to have the chance to communicate with you. I hope that you like the messages, that you share them. And you have questions, again, you can write us to our blog, godaslove@gmail.com, and we will be happy to answer your questions. And thank you for watching and listening. And I see you next time. Shabbat Shalom.